There's nothing political about sexual harassment. It's not Republican or Democrat. It's sexual harassment.
This week in Pennsylvania, Republican women in the state Senate and House introduced several bills designed to make the government workplace safer. Funding for state-related universities like Penn State, Pitt, and Temple is finally freed up. The checks are in the mail, but some insist they're not big enough. And the House moves a bill that would increase pensions for a small group of retired teachers and state workers. But should everyone get a bump? We'll discuss. Hello and welcome to This Week in Pennsylvania. I'm Dennis Owens. We're covering hot topics in PA policy and politics, as well as the issues that are important to you and your family. Well, just hours after it passed the House and Senate, Governor Shapiro quickly signed a bill freeing up funding for state-related universities like Penn State, Temple, and Pitt. Those three schools will get flat funding, which means it's the same amount they got last year. Lincoln did get a small increase in its funding. Several Lincoln students marched 66 miles from campus to the Capitol to ask lawmakers to get the deal done. Well, they listened, and they did on Wednesday. The governor signed it on Thursday. The House was willing to give the schools a hike if those schools promised to freeze tuition. But in the end, they settled for no increase and no strings attached.
Let's be clear. These funds go directly to students and their families, Pennsylvania students, Pennsylvania residents. We should be investing in education. By keeping things flat year over year.
The governor also signed a House Republican priority, put the four state-related universities fully under the state's right-to-know law for increased transparency. Sexual harassment in the workplace was a priority for Republican women in both chambers this week. Senate President Kim Ward and Democrat Maria Collette are co-sponsoring a bill to have third parties investigate allegations. No internal investigations, which can be perceived as cover-ups. They also want a uniform process instead of the different approaches that are taken by the House, the Senate, and the governor's office.
We're here to do an investigation that is going to do justice to the people that are taking the risk to step forward and make that allegation. We're treating them with the integrity and the dignity that they deserve, and we are getting to the bottom of things.
We can't stop all of the sexual harassment, but we can make sure the process is in place to handle it when it does happen.
Another Senate bill would require public disclosure of sexual harassment settlements that use taxpayer dollars. Over in the House, 5 women unveiled 5 bills, a package, they say, that would make significant reforms to protect victims and taxpayers. This comes after several harassment cases this year, including Mike Zabel, who resigned from his House seat after multiple harassment allegations. More recently, top aide to Governor Shapiro, Mike Verb, was accused and has left his job. One of the 5 House bills would shield a victim's identity.
Information as sensitive as a sexual harassment or a sexual assault victim's name should not be accessed through our Commonwealth's right-to-know process. This jeopardizes the victim's safety and their privacy, and it's just plain wrong.
Other proposed bills include amending the definition of sexual harassment to include nonverbal acts and increasing transparency when complaints are filed in the Ethics Committee. And this week, a spokesperson for the state treasurer's office confirmed to us that it has received and will process a $196,000 payment to the ex-state employee who accused Mike Verb of harassing her. The Treasury will also pay out just under $50,000 each to her 2 attorneys. Total price tag, $295,000. $250,000 of it will come from the state's self-funded insurance, the rest from the governor's appropriation. Well, it has been months since the House passed 2 gun safety bills heralded as historic, but the Senate has yet to pull the trigger on them and likely will not. Ceasefire PA unveiled a digital clock at the Capitol on Monday, noting that it had been 175 days and counting since an extreme risk protection order or red flag bill and a bill requiring even private sales of long guns go through background checks. 175 days since they passed in the House. Supporters call them 2 common sense proposals that 80% of Pennsylvanians support, but Senate Judiciary Chairwoman Lisa Baker is pumping the brakes.
The constitutionality and the enforceability and practicality are something that I continue to have concerns about and do not have plans to advance the bills.
Read the polling on this. Read the polling on this. The time is now, and if not now, we're not begging, by the way. We're not begging. We're asking. But be very clear, the next election cycle, the public will be demanding.
Very interesting right there. Senate Republicans say the bills don't pass legal muster, but the House, which also has lawyers, passed those bills. Well, it's been 15 years since the Clean Indoor Air Act. It exempted private clubs and casinos from smoking. A group of casino workers attended a House committee hearing this week, urging lawmakers to end that exemption and make casinos go smoke-free. It passed along party lines. Democrats support it. Republicans are opposed. A bill to boost the retirement benefits for a specific group passed the House this week. Those retirees were left out of the 2001 law that gave everybody else an increase. Just discussing pensions for retired teachers and state workers in Pennsylvania can be fraught with lots of opinions and emotions on all sides.
The yeas are 140. The nays are 63. The bill passes the House.
House Bill 1416 would increase the pensions of those who retired before 2001 by as much as 25%. They were excluded from Act 9, which hiked pensions for everybody else.
These dedicated individuals shaped our states and children's futures. Yet for 2 decades, for 20 years, budgets have ignored their financial needs.
But Act 9 pushed the state and school districts to the financial brink, and they are still grappling to pay an estimated $60 billion in unfunded liability. It'll cost $1 billion more to give those left-out retirees a raise.
Local school districts would have to raise the school district property tax to fund this. Because this legislation creates an additional unfunded pension liability.
I was under governor's jurisdiction.
Beth Troy was an auditor for the state, retired in 2003, has not seen a pension increase in 20 years, and thinks all retirees deserve a bump.
It's a pain in the rear end, to be truthful. I mean, I would like to be able to do more things than I can because the dollar only stretches so far.
I think it's unfair to others who have worked in the private sector.
Erie's Luke Davidoff is a recently retired banker surprised to learn how much retired teacher friends were making in pensions and insists benefits moving forward need to be reduced, not increased.
None of the legislatures want to hear this because it's such an unpopular subject. And I get that. It won't get him reelected. I know that it's wrong. It is a non-sustainable model that will continue to burden taxpayers.
But also wrong, says Dauphin County Rep. Dave Madsen, is ignoring the most vulnerable retirees in the system, now in their 80s and 90s.
I do think we can find the monies to compensate these people that made our quality of life better throughout all the years.
And that bill is on to the Senate. Majority Leader there, Joe Pittman, tells me he has genuine empathy for those pre-2001 retirees, but also has serious concerns about what he calls the fragile nature of the pension system. We're going to talk more about pensions with our analysts a little bit later in this show. Several Veterans Day observances in and around the Capitol this week. One honored PA veterans who've received the nation's highest military honor. It's the Congressional Medal of Honor. Several hundred Pennsylvanians have earned them, but retired Army Colonel Walter Joe Marm is the only living recipient. He was the keynote speaker at a service in the Capitol Rotunda.
I'm very humbled to be among so many veterans and active duty servicemen and women. And it's harder to wear the medal than it is to earn it. So I have to set the example for all the brave men and women that are still serving today.
Colonel Marm grew up in Western Pennsylvania, earned his Medal of Honor in the Vietnam War when he took on a large group of enemy soldiers who had his platoon pinned down. He defeated them even though he had run out of grenades and suffered serious injuries. True hero right there. Up next, a flurry of sexual harassment bills introduced in the legislature this week. We're sitting down with a woman who's been a major driver on the issue. And welcome back to This Week in Pennsylvania. We are joined now by State Representative Abby Major. She's a Republican from Armstrong and Westmoreland counties and has one of the most interesting biographies in the legislature. Served in the Army. Thanks for that, by the way. You're accredited in mortuary science. You work in the funeral home business. You were the chief of staff to former Representative Jeff Pyle, and now you have that seat. So welcome. Happy to see you. You,
Dennis.
you, however, have become the face of fighting against sexual harassment in the workplace. As we reported, there were 2 bills in the Senate this week, 5 introduced in the House, including one you had. Run those down for us. What would they do and why are they needed?
Sure. So 5 Republican women in the House decided to pick up these 5 issues that will help protect women and taxpayers regarding sexual harassment in the State House. So the one I introduced is an amendment to the House rules, which would tighten up the language there for holding House members accountable and give the Ethics Committee some additional power. It includes adding nonverbal acts of sexual harassment. That could be like hand gestures or things like that. It expands where you get in trouble for sexual harassment. So the rules right now are kind of limited, and this kind of expands it so that if you're acting inappropriately in any House property or as you're acting in your capacity as a legislator in any way, it allows the Ethics Committee to bring this issue against you. It also allows for appeals, which is not an issue. If new evidence would come to light, you can go back to the Ethics Committee and say, hey, can you please reconsider? And it allows for that process. And then it increases transparency for the Ethics Committee. Representative Ann Flood has a piece of legislation that will enshrine the federal Speak Out Act into Pennsylvania law. And that is to make NDAs that are signed prior as sometimes when you get a job, they make you sign an NDA, and this makes sure that later, if there's a sexual harassment issue, that wouldn't preclude you from talking about this issue separately. You can still sign an NDA after the fact as part of a settlement if you want, but this law would protect you from one that was signed prior to. Representative Donna Shuren has a bill that will put settlement information on the PennWatch website so that the public will be able to look and see how their taxpayer dollars are used to pay out these settlements. Representative Charity Grimm-Krupa has a bill that will allow us to go back and recoup the money from the settlements from the perpetrator. Right now, there's almost zero accountability for people in these situations who have these settlements paid out with taxpayer dollars, and this would allow us to go back and recoup that money from them either through their pension or a payment plan or however.
Right now in the House. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, there's one more. Representative Kate Klunk introduced a bill to amend the right to know law so that if a right to know request is filed about a settlement, the victim's name will be redacted, because right now anybody can file a right to know request and find out the victim's name. So we just want to protect those victims.
Because that would help more of them come forward. Some of them may not come forward, fearing if their name would get out there. Right now, the Democrats control the House. 5 Republican women introduced these bills. Democrats were noticeable by their absence. What's the likelihood that Democrats move these forward, which would have to happen for these bills to move ahead?
I've had a lot of Democrats approach me and say that they support these measures, and we've had some co-sponsors already on the bill. We've received some criticism saying that while we were in the majority, we never acted on this. And to that, I just say, I wasn't here then, and the other women introducing these bills haven't been in office that long, except for Representative Klunk. But if you look at her history, this is an issue she's been working on for her entire time in office. She just now has the additional support of us 4 women with her.
And when you released your report this week, we do want to note this is a bipartisan issue, and there was a report that was just issued that studied the entire nation and found it to be a pretty big problem. Give us the above the fold headline on that report.
Sure. The report was released by the National Women's Defense League, and they looked at the last decade and every public instance of sexual harassment that happened. They found 359 incidents that included 130 state lawmakers. So that's elected officials and governors were included also. So that doesn't even include situations like the recent one in Governor Shapiro's administration with the Secretary of Legislative Affairs, because he wasn't an elected official. There were some key points that they found. One, people working in state houses know that sexual harassment is an issue and they know who the perpetrators are. Sexual harassment is not a partisan issue. It was almost 50% Republicans and 50% Democrats. It was very close. 96% of accused harassers are males. And it's just a systemic problem that isn't going to go away on its own.
And it also found that 88% of those got reelected. What do you make of that?
It's crazy. I think times have changed though over the last decade. The public's reaction to this kind of stuff is different than it was 10 years ago. And I think and I hope that people now will see that if their legislator is acting in this way, I'm really hoping that we would no longer reelect them.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. I'm sure we're going to be talking to you more as this topic is not going away. I'm sure of that. Abby Major, thanks for being with us. And stay with us. Much more This Week in Pennsylvania when we come back.
But let's be realistic. It's way too much, Dennis. Everybody knows it, and nobody wants to do anything about it.
Now that is a viewer. His name is Luke Davidoff. He's a recent retiree from Erie. Hey Luke, how you doing? He sent me a long note how frustrated he is. He recently retired as a banker and has some friends that were teachers that also retired. He was in the private sector. Says these teachers are making a very good pension, a high percentage of what their salaries were, younger than him and retired. And he's just like, I see everybody wringing their hands about where's more money for schools. And he's like, there it is, as far as there's a lot of money that goes, and that goes right off the top every year. And he said, look, I don't want to hurt anybody that's about to retire, but for the future, it's unsustainable. I'm a former banker. I've done the math on the back of the napkin, and it's just not sustainable, is his argument.
Well, the Republican complaint for a long time was that all this extra money we were pumping into the K through 12 education system was not actually getting to the classroom because it was doing stuff like that. Not said, and his comments are yours, are the really good gold-plated benefits that these folks have gotten. Now, again, it's not their fault. They have collectively bargained with their local school boards to get all of this stuff.
And have earned it. Being a teacher is a great job. Two of my siblings are teachers, so I don't want to.
There are lots of good jobs out there, Dennis, filled with good people. It doesn't, in and of itself, entitle you to a really good pension. There are lots of people. There are lots of people like us who are self-employed who we have to do it all ourselves.
Oh, absolutely, but I don't think because not everyone gets a good pension that these public servants should be denied a good pension. I mean, there's been major inflation since these pre-Act 9 retirees
okay, so let's separate. He was talking about in general, thinking there needs to be some corrections for people that are going to retire in the future.
They want more.
He wasn't specifically talking about the pre-Act 9, which was our story, and those people are average age 80, average pension $20,000, and they were left behind. They kind of missed the boat, and they want to go back and fix that. I think a lot of people would agree maybe that should happen.
Well, I think that everyone should be able to retire at a reasonable age and make enough money to live reasonably. You know, $20,000 that some of these retirees are getting is just simply not enough to live anywhere at any age. And these people served the Commonwealth for 20, 30 plus years. They're entitled to retire with dignity. They served our generations of school students. We shouldn't be denying them a pension now.
They may have other income. They may have Social Security income.
They do have Social Security.
In Pennsylvania, we don't tax pensions, so that money they get, whatever it was that they earned throughout the years, totally funded, mostly funded by taxpayer dollars. That's not taxed, okay? That's one of the reasons we have a large and still growing senior population, because we don't tax
It is an
pensions.
attractive place for.
Exactly.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there for a moment. We got more to talk about. Stay with us. Much more This Week in Pennsylvania when we come back. Welcome back to This Week in Pennsylvania. I was remiss and did not introduce our outstanding analysts, Christopher Nicholas and Brittany
I
Cranston.
think after all these years, Dennis, you know how to do this, right?
Planned Parenthood is one of your clients, and you were very excited this week because the State House did pass a bill that kind of relates to abortion. Lay that out for us.
Sure. So what the House passed is called a SHIELD bill, and it protects patients and providers from being prosecuted in other states if they cross into Pennsylvania to receive care that is safe, legal, and accessible here. So if a state like West Virginia bans abortion, you live in Morgantown, and you come to Pennsylvania to have an abortion, Pennsylvania will not participate in West Virginia's investigation of you traveling. There are some states, I believe Tennessee is among them, that pass sort of abortion hunter legislation that allows their state AG's office to pursue these women and their providers for seeking care elsewhere.
So that did pass the House?
That did pass the House with pretty big bipartisan support. There were 16 Republican yes votes, and I imagine it would pass in the Senate if the Senate Republicans would have put it up for a vote.
This is a solution in search of a problem, Dennis. None of the states around us have abortion hunting bills, which I agree is terrible, but I don't think very many women from Tennessee are going to hoof it up to Pennsylvania for an abortion. So there's none of these states around us that are doing that or even threatening to do it. So it's kind of an empty gesture from the House Democrats, which they have their 1-seat majority, they're allowed to do that, but let's call it what it is.
It's keeping abortion on the front burner, though, isn't it?
I think the abortion is keeping itself on the front burner. Without federal protections, our rights are up for debate every single day in state legislatures and state courts. There's no backstop anymore. A state can pass an incredibly regressive abortion ban from 6 weeks or earlier before you even know that you're pregnant.
Not with the Democratic governor.
I'm not talking about Pennsylvania. I'm talking about other states.
Other states. Okay.
This SHIELD law, it becomes more important as states around us continue to pass more regressive legislation.
Well, when we have another show this week in other states, we can talk about that. But this is about Pennsylvania. You have a Democratic governor who tweets out every other day that he's never going to let abortion not be accessible. So the whole thing of, it's going to be outlawed by somebody is a total canard for at least as long as Josh Shapiro was governor. There's no appetite in the House legislative caucuses to ban abortion. There are some people that want to do it, but it's a non-starter even when we had a big majority.
There was in July of just last year. The House and Senate passed House Bill 106, which would put the words "no right to abortion" in our Constitution. To say there's no appetite a mere few months later is just not true.
Well, but that has dropped, though. Nobody's pushing to bring that back up.
If this was a really important bill, the Democrats would have passed it before the election and used it as campaign fodder. The fact they did it afterwards shows it's really just virtue signaling, which again is not unique among House Democrats.
And I can all but guarantee you, abortion will be front burner issue for the Democrats in the next election as well.
Note to Dennis, abortion has always been an issue in Pennsylvania, even before the Dobbs decision. It may not have been a big statewide one, but
okay, we have to leave it there. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to you. Thanks for joining us on This Week in Pennsylvania.